let's start with the shutdown. This continues another day as yesterday when tensions are high. And even though there's talk of having talks, we don't seem headed towards a truce. I could show you 1,000 examples of this. Let's show you two. First, here's we've said what's unusual about this shutdown is typically in a shutdown, the polls start to move in one direction. One side seems to be worried that they'll be blamed. And that hasn't happened here. If you said to privately to top Democratic officials, if things start to go wrong, will that worry you? If and in fact, a couple times they've said this publicly, and they've paid a price for it, perhaps saying, "Well, no, when things go bad, that's our leverage. When people are when food stamps are cut off, that's our leverage." But the Republicans feel just the same way. Here's an ABC News Washington Post poll, which suggests number 5, please, suggests one of the few polls we've seen so far that one side's being blamed more than the other. And according to this poll, the side that's being blamed more is the Republicans. Americans blame Trump and GOP more than Democrats for shutdown. Independents hold Trump and Republicans responsible for the shutdown by a 2-to-1 margin. That is much different than previous polls we've seen. Now, maybe this is on the leading edge of teasing this out. They are the party that controls both branches. They are the party of the Republican Party, which typically, for whatever reason, by the media and the public, gets blamed. Mark Caputo, I'm almost to you. And the Democrats, have done a decent messaging job. Punch Bowl reported today that there's a private poll for Democrats saying the public would much prefer they continue to fight on behalf of health care than give in and pass a continuing resolution. Here's the vice president, as the president was flying back from Asia, the vice president today, flanked by officials connected to the airline industry, private sector companies, unions, etc., and the Secretary of Transportation, making the case that this is all the Democrats' fault. They just need to come in and vote for a clean CR. Number 7, please.
President, on the issue of the shutdown, there is the concern about 42 million people losing their SNAP benefits.
Of course.
Over this weekend. The administration moved a lot of money around to pay troops, to pay federal law enforcement, and is telling Congress you can't move money around to pay at least some of those benefits. Why not? And would there be some push perhaps in the next 48 hours to try to do that so Americans don't go hungry?
Well, here's the problem. If you go back to previous government shutdowns, what has happened is that sometimes the president has tried to make the shutdown as painful as possible on the American people. I give the president of the United States great credit and the entire team for trying to make this as painless as possible. The Democrats are acting irresponsibly. He doesn't want the American people to suffer because of it. But look, right now, this government, this administration, we're like guys running around, with a leak in a damn wall, trying to plug it with bubble gum. And we plug one spot with bubble gum, and we plug another spot with bubble gum, and we plug another spot with bubble gum. Why don't the Democrats just stop this entire charade and reopen the government so that we don't have to try to make this thing work on a shoestring budget, which is what we're trying to do. The unfortunate reality, and we're starting to see this with our aviation industry, we're going to find out the hard way with SNAP benefits. The American people are already suffering, and the suffering is going to get a lot worse. Not because the President of the United States has failed to make the shutdown painless. He's tried to do everything that he can to make it as unpainless as possible. The reason that pain is coming and the reason it's building is because we're not passing the clean bill to reopen the government. It's a very easy thing to do.
All right. So, Mark, you first. Is the premise, do you think, correct that the way this will end is one side feels the pressure to end it? And if so, who's feeling the pressure?
Obviously, it could be both sides. I think the Democrats have communicated a little more nervousness. Chuck Schumer the other day, we wrote in Axios about how they were showing some sort of signs of hitting sort of the negotiation stage of this. The polling, I think, is correct that the public blames Republicans more. And I think you're right. It's because they're in charge of Congress and the presidency. But I also think that the mainstream media hasn't covered this shutdown the same way it would if the colors and parties were reversed. The fact is Democrats didn't supply the votes to open this up. All Republican votes were there for a continuing resolution, and therefore it was the Democratic votes or the absence thereof that shut it down. And that hasn't been, I think, as clearly communicated. Now, it also raised the issue of how much are people paying attention to the mainstream media anyway with shutdown news? I'm not quite sure. But what I haven't understood fully is what Democrats are fully thinking, because their messaging is Donald Trump is a dictator and no kings. And then and Donald Trump is cutting government too much, and that's bad. So then they shut down the government, which empowers the executive more, and it empowers them more and gives them more cover to
Right.
start cutting government.
Right.
And so, to you love my obscure classical references. It seems as if the Democratic voters have just forced the Democratic politicians into battle the same way that the Spartan wives would, saying, "Come home with your shield or
Right.
upon it," which is come back alive with your shield, or if you're dead, your friends are carrying you on the shield. I think they're going to wind up dead here. I think they're going to wind up sort of having to capitulate because, as the White House has told me and as we've written, the White House believes it has a high, quote, higher pain tolerance. And the president doesn't believe in negotiating with hostage takers in Congress. In Congress is an important phrase because we did negotiate with hostage takers with Hamas, but that's a whole other separate category.
All right, Matt, if Carl Host of the New York Times is the 101st senator, you are 102nd. So you know the rhythms of Capitol Hill and the executive branch. Are Republicans the ones feeling the heat now?
I honestly don't think they are because it's so interesting how many of those polls that show some people might lean towards blaming Republicans are also showing Democrat Party approval rating continuing to drop. Or seeing things like, Schumer's own personal approval rating continuing to drop. I think that that was very interesting. Wall Street Journal had a great piece on that, and CNN had that Harry Enton clip that went super viral talking about how Democrats' whole position in the generic congressional ballot has actually gone down through this. And so I do think that there's a bit of a disconnect there. My bold prediction is I believe that there will be a deal announced to end the shutdown before next Wednesday. And I think it goes a lot to what Mark is talking about. I think Democrats are feeling more pressure here. One dynamic that I've watched really closely just in these last couple days is the media beginning to really clamp down. There was a Jake Tapper exchange with House Democrat from Melanie Stansbury from New Mexico, where she said this is Republicans' choice to do this. And Tapper pushed back and said, wait, Democrats are the ones in the Senate who held back their votes. There have been more and more of these exchanges where Democrats are on their back foot. And so if polls aren't enough to move Democrats, I believe this shifting tide in media might do it. And I do think that the food stamp flap in particular, I love what Mark was getting towards about the no kings and they are treating Trump like a dictator, because the other dynamic we're seeing this week with the food stamp fight is the fact that now they're calling on Trump to be a dictator by circumventing Congress. There's two things they're doing. One, they are trying to sue the president to force him to go around congressional authority to release that food stamp fund. There's also a bill being discussed in the House that would force President Trump to release that food stamp funds, the emergency food stamp funds, mind you. And the other part of that that I think is really tough for Democrats to square is that emergency funding is for things like school lunches in the case of a natural disaster, not a political shutdown that nobody's really made a good academic argument for. So I believe Democrats are starting to feel that pressure. You're seeing more and more Democrats willing to say out loud what it is they need to hear to end the shutdown, because they are looking for an off-ramp to this. And I think that, this November 1st deadline on food stamp is going to be a huge pressure point. Thanksgiving getting closer with travel concerns. The sort of stagecraft of JD Vance and, airline executives and, transportation trade associations, Chris Sununu there. That was very effective because people are starting to think, what if I can't travel to see my family? And Democrats are going to start feeling the pain from that.
Yeah. Former Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire is now the head of the lobbying group for the airlines. That's why he was there. Mark,
Yep.
thoughts on what Matt said?
Oh, he's right. I mean, just to add, the Airline Pilots Association came out today and said we need a clean CR, i.e., Senate Democrats need to vote for it and open the government. You had prior to that, you had the Teamsters, and then you had the American Federation of Government Employees. So you have three unions now representing various constituencies, are all saying there needs to be a clean CR, and they're not all explicitly saying, therefore, Democrats need to vote for it. But it just seems like it's more pressure to bear on Democrats. I don't know the polling on SNAP recipients and political party, but I have a feeling that might skew disproportionately Democrat. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
So that is also an additional wrinkle. And a lot of Democrats just sort of instinctively support the idea of helping the poor. And an easy way to end this SNAP problem is to just capitulate and vote that way. But the problem is that verb capitulate. They just don't want it to appear
Yeah.
that way to their base.
Yeah.
Here we are.
Again, raise your hand if you want on the conversation. There's so much we could say about the shutdown thing, and I'll say this: Vance is so skilled at pushing back on media bias, so skilled, and he made the point today, absolutely correct, that if the Republican Party was the one refusing to vote for a clean CR, all Democrats would be hounded. Now they've gotten some questions about it, and Schumer and Jeffries have had to push back, but there's tolerance for it, whereas if this were the Republicans, there would not be. Cozy Earth makes clothes viscous from bamboo, very comfortable, moisture wicking, magically keeps you warm when you are cold, and cold when you cool you down when you're warm, temperature regulating. The bamboo sheets are the most comfortable sheets I've ever had. I recommend those, as you probably know, as well as the latest edition, the Bubble Cuddle Blanket. Luxurious combination of comfort and style. Recommend that. And then, of course, there are the shirts, the pants. The pants, once again, today happens not every day, but quite often. Someone texted me and said, Mark, I'm wearing the pants right now, and they look spectacular, and I look very good, but I feel very good. And then I always think of the Billy Joel line from Saturday Night Live: "It's better to look good, my friend, than to feel good." But with the pants from Cozy Earth, you don't need to choose. Go to CozyEarth.com, use my code 2way, 20% off for the best pants, joggers, shirts, everything. You get to at the end when you're buying something, they'll say, "Where did you hear about us?" Say you heard about them right here on Two-Way. Home isn't just where you live, it's how you feel. Let's go home with Cozy Earth.
They say that something that's easy is like a walk in the park. Well, easier than a walk in the park, hit the subscribe button, be part of the Two-Way community, never miss an episode, be part of our conversations. Thank you for your service to America.
And don't forget, you can now listen to the morning meeting and Two-Way Tonight on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.